Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Indeed it is. It is showtime. Welcome in, and it is time for the Rumble. We're ready to rumble, and it's a WWE event. As we're recording this, and we'll touch on it, Zelenskyy and Trump and Vance just went hammer and tong at each other in front of the cameras in the Oval Office, and it was an extraordinary bit. And I know the guys at the table here haven't seen it entirely. You'll want to go back and watch it, but John Tory is here, former mayor of Toronto. Tim Hudak, a partner at Council Public Affairs, and our friend Keith Leslie from CHTV. And John, you and I were talking about that extraordinary exchange as, you know, we were coming on here, and all I could think of was as Trump and Vance are telling Volodymyr Zelenskyy that you're not thankful enough, perhaps the free trade negotiators on this side of the border should be prepared for that kind of welcome.
Oh, my goodness. You know, this kind of thing, as we were also discussing before we started, you'd think it was made up. I mean, you'd think it was kind of part of some reality TV show, because if you think back to all the presidents, including some who've been scoundrels and not nice people and all the rest, they didn't act this way, like, and certainly not in front of cameras. I mean, you know, it's just, the whole thing is just beyond comprehension. It really is. It's sad.
Well, and Tim, you were down there for the initial meetings. I guess it's a couple of weeks ago. It feels longer than that now, when the premiers were down in Washington to get their ear. There's nothing in there that suggested to me that Donald Trump is on track to have anything but his way. I mean, clearly, if he's willing to talk about the Russia-Ukraine situation, the tariffs and his approach to them aren't going to be any less problematic in terms of breaking through and, you know, having any kind of mature, shall I say, conversation over it.
Well, the weird thing is, so much has already happened, right? The ambition has been so strong. There's been so many announcements, but it's been less than 100 days. State of the Union address, I think, is happening next week, March 4th or March 5th. So maybe not a lot has been, I guess you say, he's bound to have his way, but there's so many checks and balances, right? In the American system, he has a very narrow margin in the House of Representatives. He's got the Freedom Caucus to contend with. It just tells me that this craziness, this roller coaster, the ups and downs and twists and turns, it's got to hit flat ground at some point. And I still think it's early in the process. And despite the madness that you described, something that sounds like WWE, and I am a WWE fan. One of my claims to glory when I was in politics, I helped bring WWE to Toronto in 2002, met The Undertaker and Vince McMahon and the whole gang. I like the wrestling. I think it's going to calm down.
Well, but this is real, Keith. This is real. They're actually coming off the turnbuckle and hitting each other.
And balances. Where are we going to see checks and balances? The Trump administration has already made it clear. There are three branches of government, all equal. The courts do not have say over top of the Trump administration. Donald Trump has made that clear already. So the fact he's upsetting the entire world order, he wants just chaos for chaos' sake, it seems. He's, siding with Russia publicly. He's got the Europeans, he's got the whole world basically upset. Not just, it seems quaint when we look back now to the early days of 6 weeks ago when he was talking about taking over Panama and Greenland and maybe annexing Canada, economically. It's just been every single day. There's just this fire hose of chaos, as I say it. And I don't know how any of us are supposed to react to it other than just work through it, live through it. You asked about the Canada trade representatives going into negotiations in the United States. I think it's basically a matter of, go into the room with your eyes wide open and your hands in both pockets, and then just hope you're dealing with someone who's reasonable and who has the ear or the support of what the president wants or knows what the president wants, because right now, nobody really does other than Donald Trump.
But even on that, John, I guess the story was today they were talking about, the changes at the border. And the Canadians were flashing up the statistics and the number of the amount of drugs that were seized and so on in whatever period of time. And, we're hoping that will satisfy the president. Well, no, it's not. It's just not. And there doesn't seem to be a plausible target there. So even if they were talking to some representative in Washington, it has to get through the Trump filter, and there's no way of knowing how it could possibly.
But that's why this was contrived from the beginning, because when you looked at the numbers, way back before today, at how much fentanyl actually came from Canada as a percentage overall, or just in terms of its raw quantity, it was next to nothing. So this was a contrived reason to have the tariff discussion. And I think you're right. So, okay, in response to that, we do what is sensible, which is to impose some additional measures and start dramatically increasing seizures of fentanyl and arrests for fentanyl, all the things you'd expect, and appoint a czar and all this sort of thing. And then he says, no, it's still a serious problem. It was never a serious problem. I mean, 1 ounce of fentanyl is serious, but you know what I'm saying? Relative to what's coming from other places, it was never a serious problem to begin with. It was a contrived excuse for the tariffs. And no matter what we do, it doesn't matter. So that's just what you're dealing with here. I heard an American commentator speak at a lunch here in Toronto, a very respected commentator. He just said, look, to the extent you think, and this was before the election, there are any rules whatsoever that apply to this man, that he plays by any rules, there are any established customs that he would follow in regard to anything, forget it. There aren't. He just does what he thinks on a given day, and it doesn't matter what that is. He just does it. And that's what we're dealing with here.
When he was told this week that only 1% of the fentanyl entering the U.S. comes from Canada, he turned it back around and said, Canadians are only capturing 1% of the fentanyl that's coming into the United States. How do you counter that argument? You really can't. He's just going to use his own facts in his own way. And no, it's not even 1%. It's a minuscule amount coming in from here. But as you said, Mr. Tory, it's just an excuse to bring in the tariff calc. And clearly he wants tariffs on the whole world. So this was just an excuse. But he's sticking to it. I mean, it's never going to be enough. Dave, you asked, what about the final? It's never going to be enough for him. He's always going to want something more, regardless of what we agree to, or hopefully we don't capitulate, but we agree to and negotiate with him. He's still always going to want more.
Well, I guess yesterday we talked about James Carville's patient strategy, Tim. This today example of the behavior in the Oval Office is a really good example of what Carville's right. We need this, strategic patience, in as hard as it is, we need it right now.
Yeah, I think I'll reflect on, what I heard when I was in Washington, and a big part of that from conservatives, Republicans, was we're not sure what the president is after, right? He's taking this hard line, he's pushing people, he's using sort of the Trump approach of great hyperbole to see what shakes out. But it's not obvious actually what he wants at the end of the day. And as John Tory's discussed, the fentanyl thing is a phony issue. Behind that, what does he actually want? And if that's not clear, even known to the president, how the heck do you negotiate? All of that having been said, I do believe what Premier Ford has done, when the Liberals finish their race, if there's time before an election campaign, what they will try to do at a federal government, and working with state governors, I still think, Dave, that pays off. I think piece by piece, you build that, you build allies, you have Americans and talking to Americans. So despite the chaos at the top, I think underneath that surface, progress is being made.
Well, you said to me, Tim, that when you came back to all of us, I think on this, maybe it was on this program, that, when you talk to people down in Washington, they're not only mystified, but a lot of them don't even agree. And somebody close to the circle of people that were down there with the premier have said that, a lot of them actually go beyond not understanding him, but completely disagree with him and think it's an unjustified and unnecessary and unwise strategy. So that's got to give at some point in time.
Well, yes, at some point in time, but I guess the issue is we're running up against real dates on the calendar, Keith. I mean, the 4th of March and April the 2nd, and yeah, right. So, what the hell is all of this going to look like, and how do you possibly not even counter it? I don't know. The level of chaos.
React. I mean,
go ahead. Yeah,
wait and see what he actually does. I think every time we're going to have to wait and see what Trump actually does. Does he do what he said he was going to do on that date? Ironically, the Ontario legislature was supposed to resume on Monday. It's not going to be coming back on Monday, and the really re-elected Ford government is not given a date for it to come back. But they do need to come back soon. I think they ran the whole election on countering the Trump tariffs. So let's see your plan. I mean, let's I assume they're working on it right now, and we need to see, a throne speech and a budget, probably both within March. We've only got 4 weeks for this to actually happen. If Trump's tariffs come in on Tuesday at 25%, it's not going to take long for that to really, smack the auto industry down. It's going to take longer for other consumer products, but the auto industry in particular, they're telling us it's a matter of days before they're going to shut down on both sides of the border. I don't know how long that can last, but this is the kind of thing that we have to be prepared for. And we need to see our newly elected government ready in the legislature, working with the opposition parties on, a Team Ontario approach to deal with this. And, he's got a $40 billion plan to help Ontario copes with these tariffs. Is it going to be, COVID type payments to workers, support for businesses beyond tax breaks? I mean, there's all sorts of plans. We need to see what the government's going to do here. So I think the Trump chaos, while it worked for the Ford government during the election campaign and handily got them reelected, they're going to have to deal with the reality of it now, and perhaps as soon as Tuesday.
Well, Tim, doesn't it make it all the more difficult to decide the details of how that money is allocated when we're living with this increased level of chaos? We're not quite sure what the damage is going to be. We know there's damage coming. We just don't know how bad it's going to be or where.
For sure. And if tariffs are stacked, if they're across the board. So I think what you do is you prepare for the worst. They did insert into their platform significant sums, as Keith outlined. Goals around eliminating Ontario's barriers that keep other provincial trade from coming to Ontario and vice versa, and using that to open up markets within Canada. So there is a plan there. And, a good part of Premier Ford's team were focused on delivering another majority mandate. And congratulations that they ran a strategically brilliant campaign. It was well coordinated through all of the ridings and had a strong result. Part of the team is back there working with the civil service to prepare. I suspect you'll see 3 points. Number one, I don't think you back down to the bully, because he will just demand more. I expect we will see tariffs. I think we will retaliate. And then when there's some pain, tough as that is to go through on both sides of the border, then I think it starts penetrating the American consciousness more and developing some momentum to take a step back and look for probably the kind of compromise that Premier Ford put on the table with his fortress Can-Am approach of growing both economies and lowering costs across the border.
And Dave, Tim makes a really good point. I mean, I watched with interest when things started slowly to come apart, and they haven't really come apart completely yet on the Doge stuff, where you had Republicans going to town hall meetings and getting beaten up because some of their relatives at the town hall, the people at the town hall, were losing their jobs. And if you think about this tariff thing, we're consumed by it here because we're Canada and we're the kind of smaller, country, I guess, in the whole thing, and Trump's initiating it. I suspect most American people are blissfully unaware that this whole thing's going on. And until, as Tim says, some pain is felt on their side of the border where an auto plant does shut down in Michigan or somewhere, I think, you won't see any bending on their part because nobody's doing any pressuring. Like nobody's, or some people are, some of these governors and so on, but it's not happened with the general public yet because they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, and I guess go back to that strategic patience level, and we're going to just have to be ready for it. And more than ever, probably take to heart Stephen Harper's comments last week, Keith. Just, we better be ready for this because the only way we're going to win is be prepared to actually put some skin in the game, literally.
Well, it's going to be painful. We're going to have to fight back painfully and as tough as we can. But I think it's what we've seen from Trump in the whole 51st state talk is that it has united Canadians in a way to, I know it's small at this point, but the shopping Canadian every way you can. I mean, when I was in Sobeys yesterday, the announcements just kept coming over. We'll mark all our Canadian products for us. Let's support our Canadian producers. Let's get it. This is something Canadians are absolutely getting behind, whether it's a small thing or not. It unites us in ways that when the pain does come, we hope governments are reacting in ways to, get support to people who do need it. But it's going to be expensive. It's going to be very expensive for governments. I mean, the Ontario government's already running a deficit, and they said they won't be able to balance it if these tariffs come in. They've added $116 billion to the debt, the Tories, in the last 7 years. Well, if we get these tariffs in, we're going to have to spend $40 billion that's going to add a hell of a lot more to the debt and the deficit. So it's going to be tough fiscally no matter how we do it. But the government, it's got a plan, but it's all reactionary at this point. And we can't really know until we see exactly what it is. And then when we see the impacts of it, as we say, it appears the auto industry will be their first hit and the hardest hit right off the bat. But we also know that the auto industry basically is good for every auto industry job is good for 6 or 7 other jobs supporting the industry. So that'll quickly lead to even more job losses than we're seeing with, the Doge campaign to just cut government workers across the board. You add those two together, and I think Americans will just, keep revolting back against all these massive cuts and against the Trump tariffs when they see that the tariffs are actually costing American jobs as well.
All right, so we've spent all this time so far on the show, and we haven't even talked about the election result last night. And I saw you with your Vic Fideli signature tie on there last night on CTV, Tim. It was fun. And John, you were doing some CTV, and Keith at CH. Just top line takeaway. What was the story of the night? I know there are several, but Keith, what was the story of the night for you?
Well, my favorite story of the night, aside from the Liberals getting official opposition status, pretty important, and probably not getting a seat, I love the Bobby Ann Brady story. The one independent who got elected in a general election and got reelected last night in a general election. This is in Haldeman, Norfolk, on the shores of Lake Erie. And Bobby Ann Brady was the constituency worker for Toby Barrett, who'd been that riding representative for 27 years, a progressive conservative, a very loyal PC member in a largely rural riding. When he retired, Bobby Ann expressed that she would like to run for the job, and he wanted it, and Doug Ford's office said no. They wanted to appoint their own candidate. Well, she won that election, and last night she won re-election as an independent, and the PCs threw a lot at that riding, and they ran a local mayor against her. She won with 66% of the vote. She beat the mayor by 20,000 votes in a rural riding. She had the largest plurality in the province. So that's my favorite story out of the election last night, because it shows you can stand up to the powers that be, especially if you're strong on the ground locally. And Bobby Ann Brady, man, she is strong on the ground locally. And ironically, she's a progressive conservative. She's a fiscal conservative, like she really should be in this government. And the fact that they weren't able to bring her back in the fold and run her as a candidate in this election is on them completely. And the fact that her one seat might be in the end, when the final last counts are counted, stop them from getting that one extra seat that they wanted to at least match what they got in 2022. I think there's a bit of irony there, and I kind of like it.
Yeah, it's funny, John, when I was looking at the map this morning, and I thought, oh, there's orange, and there's red, and there's blue, but what the hell happened here? It's
that big gray spot.
It's grayed out. And it really sticks out when you see it on the map. What was your story of the night?
Well, I was going to say that it was the fact that I really do think the Liberal Party has revived itself from the dead to be a fighting force now when they got 30% of the vote. But you know what? So I think that happened, but it's kind of tempered by Bonnie Crombie not having her seat and by the seat count, which is only a few more than they had before, albeit for official party status. I would say beyond that, it's a small one, and her name's gone out of my head now. It's a premature thing of forgetting the woman in Hamilton Center.
Sarah Jama.
Yeah. I was heartened by that in the sense that it proves to me that people do watch, and they do watch how you conduct yourself, because the party, the NDP, still won the seat handily, but she finished fourth, not second, not third, but fourth. And I think it just indicates to me in a heartening kind of way that people watch. If you behave yourself in a way that is just beyond the pale, especially when it comes to being prejudiced, people are just going to say no. And I was very heartened by that, because it doesn't matter, whatever your view is on any of these issues, she behaved in a way that I think everybody would find completely unacceptable. And the public said, yeah, we agree. We're not having you behave that way. You're done.
Tim, the story for you for the night?
Well, look, I think because expectations were raised by people who maybe had a bit too much hubris or testosterone or what have you, that Ford was going to get 90 to 100 seats. That should not obscure the fact that Doug Ford has won 3 consecutive majority governments. He won by a landslide. And his percent, while the seats didn't go above his total from last time around, his percent of the vote did. That's actually a remarkable accomplishment. It's a tribute to him as a leader. It's a tribute to the strategy, ruthless as it may have been to do an earlier election, and their execution. Like that, he is a political phenom, and we cannot underestimate, or we cannot understate that accomplishment. The other thing I'll throw on the pile here is the lack of a Liberal ground game. The fact that they get 30% of the vote and only end up with 14 seats, see their leader lose by a significant margin, makes me wonder what is actually left in that party when it comes to volunteers and on the ground work. Clearly, the New Democrats had game with 18 or 19% of the vote and still winning, 26, 27 seats, and the Tories did. The disappearing Liberal ground game after these consecutive losses, can you actually bounce back from that?
And if you go through it, Dave, to Tim's point, I can think of just the one because I was reading the numbers, and there's all this talk always about, does it matter if I vote? Vince Gasparo and Eglinton Lawrence lost by 114 votes, and there were quite a few like that, where the margin of victory was very, very small. And if you don't tell me, and we all know because we've been around politics a long time, that 114 votes could easily have been made up by a better ground game, it's just true. That's why you have the ground game. And so I think Tim's right. That 38% could have been converted to 31 or 2 or something, and that might have literally flipped another 6 or 7 seats that would have made the difference, because some of them are as between the NDP and the Liberals.
Well, isn't that how Ernie Eves got his landslide Ernie moniker, Keith? Isn't he won by a slim margin?
And the victory last night in James Bay by the NDP was 4 votes. There was an automatic revote coming there. Yeah. Which is always fun. I mean, I love those ones. And, Ernie Eves, as you said, landslide Ernie, he just loved that nickname because it was a tough first race when you win by 6 votes and you really hope that recount. That's got to be tough to go through a recount.
Just going to add it, you never know what's going to happen, right? When you do all the math and all the projections, and then when the boots on the ground do the work and the voters cast their ballots. So the Conservatives were expecting a win in Oshawa. The New Democrats held on there. Niagara Centre, they thought, was going to go blue for the first time since Ellis Morningstar in the 1950s and 60s. And they thought they had a shot at Windsor as well. But the surprise is they won Hamilton Mountain, which I would not have put in the Tory pool, and actually pull one out in Algoma Manitoulin as well. There, of course, you had an incumbent who was kicked out of the NDP caucus, and he still ran, I think, got about 12% of the vote, allowed the Conservative to sneak through. Well, not sneak through, won in a pretty good margin. It just shows you when you throw it all in the mix and you shake it all up, sometimes you never know what the outcome's going to be.
But that ground, to your point about the ground game, though, David, how good a ground game could the Liberals have when the last 2 elections they had no official party status? They were literally in the wilderness. They had no staff. Your volunteer base, your supports for election generally come from staff who have to take a leave of absence and go work on your campaigns and help you out like this. They had none of that. So they were, I saw some of the volunteers and I recognized some of them from the McGuinty years, quite frankly. Some of them have been working in Ottawa for a while. I guess some did come back to help out in the Ontario campaign, but it's tough. So for them to get, and this is the whole, efficiency of the vote thing, 1.5 million votes versus 900,000 for the NDP and get 14 seats versus 27. That's tough. It does show that the support for the Liberals is wide across Ontario, but it needs to be concentrated in some specific ridings like the NDP had clearly focused on. And when the Tories clearly were targeting Hamilton and Niagara NDP seats, the NDP clearly fought back hard in those ridings and made sure they held on to them. And I agree, the flipping of Hamilton Mountain from the NDP, where the incumbent is running federally, to the Conservative, didn't see that one coming, not at all.
I'm going to say it because it's the last one, and I think, like, what the hell? This also proves to me the teachers don't like to go out in the cold. So, the New Democrats had, the steel workers and a lot of other public unions, so they had troops. The Conservatives, to their credit, to Monty McNaughton and Premier Ford and Pacini, had private sector unions out there, Leuna, carpenters and such. The teachers should have been there with the Liberals. They don't like the cold.
That's Tim at timhudak.ca.
The federal Liberals, who, let's remember, would have been distracted by the leadership contest. So it was just, the whole thing was just not set up to be in their favor last night in terms of that, the whole ground game.
I also remember when Kathleen Wynne won the Liberal leadership at Maple Leaf Gardens, the teachers were outside shutting down Carlton Avenue, protesting. So they're never happy anyway, right? It doesn't matter who you are.
That's why the teachers will one day form their own party so they can vote against themselves. I'll add one last observation here. Bobby Ann Brady had served under John Tory and myself. She was like a top class staff member. If I had somebody that ran a seminar right on how to be a good staff member, she was at. I've known her since 1995. I think I always thought she'd make it after Toby retired. She's been a hell of an MPP. So I'm with Keith on that. And so often, people think, well, the political science profs understand these things and the philosophy and the math. sometimes it's personalities. And this just gets down to Doug Ford and Bobby Ann have a personality clash. She could be in cabinet right now if they didn't have that sort of sad interaction.
Well, winners and losers, and we can go through the list, but here was my number one winner on the night. Hands down, going away.
My name is Andrew Caleb. I have a YouTube channel right here, as you can all people see. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. The reason why I voted for NDP is because I'm a big fan of NDP, and I'm going live tonight, folks. So please look out for me and Twain Caleb. Take a look at this. Bye now.
There you go. But you know what? As funny as that is, he was the first guy at the door. He was motivated, and he represented, I think, what we're talking about in terms of the enthusiasm and the excitement on the ground, Tim, for the New Democrats.
I was trying to get the address. I want to check this guy out and see what kind of performer he is. Yeah, that was fun to watch. Yeah, clearly, right? Clearly, Steve Paikin maybe will do a blog on this, but the notion that you can have that low of an overall percentage and deliver that many seats is a credit to people who believed in the cause, showed a lot of enthusiasm and some strong organization on the ground. Otherwise, I can't figure it. Maybe there is like a multitude of that gentleman out there right across the orange ridings of the province.
So maybe the Liberals, John, need to be out there recruiting YouTubers or whatever. There needs to be that level of engagement.
But it's so interesting when you say that, because if you look at the results from last night, and many elections, there'll be ridings like that where they're super competitive and they win and they produce the votes, and then ridings very close by where they got 842 votes and were a distant third. I mean, it's just it's back to sort of saying that it isn't just about the stuff we talk about, the top level campaigning, what the leaders say and what the ads say. It is about stuff that happens very locally, where the same party with the same campaign, the same leader can finish a poor third with literally a few hundred votes in one constituency, and in the next door one win with 15,000. It's an extraordinary, and that's why you can never write these campaigns off. I was very wrong in my prediction, because I really thought 30% and a half decent, turning out of the vote would produce more seats for the Liberals than the NDP. And I was wrong. I mean, it didn't happen. It didn't happen for Bonnie Crombie either. I mean, it just didn't happen. But I mean, because it's just inconceivable you could get almost twice as many votes as the other party and get a fraction of the seats.
Well, John, I heard you on the radio this morning talking to John Moore about sort of, there's a bit of a victory in here for the Liberals in as much as they are now official party status. So they will have some of the benefits that they didn't have before in terms of organizing, in terms of their presence in question period, all of those sorts of things. If nothing else, that at least gives them more of a foundation to be prepared. But as you pointed out, 4 years is a long time from, in politics.
And who knows who they'll be facing in 4 years. Will the Conservatives have gone through some kind of, refreshing process, which the PC party's done over the years many times? It's just so many imponderables that it's 4 years is a very long time, and including for Bonnie Crombie. I've been through this experience of being a leader outside the House after an election. It's not pleasant, Tim remembers, and there's a disconnect. The parliamentary party is not everything, but it's very important, and you become disconnected because you're not part of it, even though you're the leader. And it's a very difficult situation she's got. Being an opposition leader is difficult to begin with, as Tim I know will agree. And then adding to that the third party thing, and adding to that the leader not in the House, very difficult.
Yeah, well,
anybody else surprised last night that she did not resign?
Well, let's get to that. Stand by.
I know tonight isn't exactly the result we were looking for, but you should be very, very proud of what we did tonight. People counted us out. They said the Ontario Liberal Party was dead. Tonight, you proved them wrong. The Ontario Liberal Party is back to official party status, and that's a big milestone. But it gets better. We increased our share of the votes substantially to 30%. Look, voters have given Doug Ford another mandate tonight. Smaller, but nonetheless. But many, many of you are asking for a strong voice to hold him accountable as Premier. And you can count on me, okay? Doug, you promised a lot of things during this campaign, and one of them was to get people more family doctors. And I'm going to hold you to it. The Ontario Liberal Party is going to hold you to it, right? Ontario, I'm here. I am with you. And I commit to you today that I will stay on.
And that's the punchline in there. And I think, Keith, it's a good question. John Tory, yesterday Tim was talking about the speeches you had to have in your pocket on election night just to make sure that you covered all your bases. What we didn't have in his pocket was the lipstick on a pig speech, and that's what that was last night. I mean, trying to make the best of a bad situation. It was really difficult, and I understand being in the room with the supporters and everything else, but boy, should she have just said thanks and hand it over to the party and walk away, or what?
I certainly don't think there was any need for her to resign last night. I think she should take some time because she did have some wins out of the election campaign. I think the problem with that speech last night, regardless of who you're in front of, I mean, even if it was an empty studio, it was without grace. It was without any of that kind of just sort of saying, okay, let's not relitigate the entire campaign in the 5 minutes I have to kind of, sum it up and concede, because that's what you're supposed to be doing.
But she didn't really concede. Did she?
I've done it, and Tim's done it. It's a very hard thing to do because you fought like hell with all your people, and you feel like you let them down and all that. But she should have had an ounce of grace last night. She didn't do herself any favors with that last night. But having said all that, she deserves some time to think about all this, to talk to the caucus, because they'll have a lot to say, and go from there. But I mean, the difficulty she's got now, if she wants to get into the legislature, which she has to sooner or later, is some of them just got elected last night, so they're not about to turn around and say, okay, I'll give that up. Others stuck through the period of non-official party status. Some of them are going to be reluctant. And the seat that materialized, if somebody did agree, may be in some far-flung part of the province that she has no connection with. So it's a difficult situation, but that's why they need some time to sort it out.
Well, I heard them talking about the first caucus meeting, Tim, and she wouldn't be in there because she didn't win. So they can't be part of that first caucus meeting. Then they're inviting those other candidates in after whatever they have in terms of their first caucus meeting. But as all that was playing out last night, and I said to you earlier today, I wonder if John Fraser has just gone to ground just trying to be small and don't pick me, don't pick me.
I was actually chatting with John. I got a tremendous amount of respect for him, and he did not want to be in this scenario. Well, once again, he was hoping and praying, and I think probably surprised with the result last night. So two things on this: a leader can still be in caucus even if they're not elected. They can't lead the caucus in the legislature, but they can certainly be in the room with caucus and lead that discussion. My gut on this is that Bonnie Crombie is a fighter. She's a scrapper. She gave up being mayor of the sixth largest city in our entire country. So it's a pretty hard pill to swallow to say, I'm going to give up. So I think she's going to fight on. And I thought she improved during the campaign. I wasn't fond of her debate performance. But then after that, right, I thought she was landing some good blows and she had a consistent health message. So I bet she feels personally she's on a bit of an upswing as well. My gut is I'm not a liberal. But I don't think it's survivable. When you lose your seat by that margin, we don't deliver a single seat in the region of Peel, and you barely get all party status. I just don't think that's survivable, but I bet she fights it out, and I think it's going to be a bit of a behind-the-scenes squabble for some time in the Ontario Liberal Party.
Yeah, Keith, the question has come up, and I think even John Wright sort of posed this scenario shortly after she landed the leadership of the party, and that was that she was the mayor of the sixth largest municipality in the country and so on, and so had that presence, had that support, had the team around her, and then ends up with the Liberal Party where she didn't have that level of status, if you will. But on her side, she's not used to losing, and that may be the big motivator here for her.
Absolutely, and it's tough. Because not only has she lost, she now has to, as John said, find one of the 14 Liberals who did get elected or any, start with asking all of them. I mean, does anybody really not want the job they just ran so hard to get? No, I mean, that's a really, really tough question. To just, you're looking to step aside. No one's looking to step aside after last night. They just won their seat. The question I have is, does she get a choice in this? Because there will be an automatic leadership review by the Liberal Party. And there seems to be some grumblings already that she didn't deliver as much as she should, that she, as the mayor of Mississauga for a decade, she should absolutely have been able to win a seat there, or at least pick another riding in Mississauga where she could have guaranteed herself a win. So I think there's a lot of criticism. It's going to be a fight. To Tim's point, she's probably going to fight it out, and she has every right to do that. But I don't know if that's going to be in her interest in the long run. I mean, especially if the knives come out and they start getting quite vicious in their attacks. And, it depends. Leadership races can get very nasty, very right off the bat. And if you're in the defensive position of, having helped, get 1.5 million votes during the election, but not getting your own seat, getting the official party status, it's going to be a lot of conflict. It's going to be a tough fight for her. And remember, before she took the leadership in December 2023, so just over a year and a bit ago, Liberals were looking to the Green Party leader, Mike Schreiner, to lead them. They were writing him a letter of consideration. So they've come that far, that fast. I don't think anyone's looking to Mike Schreiner to come over to lead the Liberals at this point, but I think there will be challenges to Bonnie Crombie's leadership from within.
John, part of this that occurred to me as it was sort of unfolding over the last couple of weeks, it landed for me on how late it took them, or how long it took them to announce what riding she was going to run in. And what does that tell you? I realize that the leader can probably say, I want to run here or whatever, but we talked yesterday about how closely the war room was watching numbers, how where the support is, where the support isn't. How much of that played into, do you think, the choice of the riding that she ended up running in?
I think with the benefit of hindsight, and the result that we got last night, I think a lot of it is that they were doing research themselves to try and help pick a riding that she could win. And they were finding, to my surprise too, because I thought she was a pretty successful mayor of Mississauga, all things considered. She certainly was electorally successful. I think they found, to their own shock, that the bedrock of PC support was strong, that all the candidates were, reasonably strong, and that there was no slam dunk. I thought she would sort of win, maybe not by much, but just on the basis that, she was our mayor and she is a party leader, and they accord a certain degree of respect to that. And it just didn't work. So I think probably they were doing research and they didn't pick one because they couldn't really find one that looked like it was a terrific prospect, and they just kept, delaying on it to see if things got better.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of played through last night, and I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't you have found a riding, it's St. Paul's in downtown Toronto where Stephanie Smythe was, or there was more likelihood, Tim, of her actually being successful, recognizable as a voice. The mistake might have been trying to be too close to home, if you will.
You can see how you think you'd win, though, right? Like, you had resounding victory as mayor. You will always think the other party's not as popular as they are. You probably would not either have imagined the circumstance where the president of the United States would become the greatest ally to your opponent and dominate the media. If it was a different horizon, Dave, where this election had taken place as planned in 2026 and Doug Ford had been in office for 8 years, she probably would have won that seat. But, the Ford machine, I'm trying to think, could anybody have stopped the Ford machine, considered the strategy, the execution of the premier, and the circumstances of this election campaign? So, if you thought when she declared her seat, the election was going to be down the road, it actually makes sense. She just didn't know what was going to happen in February.
Well, again, to John's point, they had to have been looking at those numbers and where the support was all the way through, and they didn't actually put her in a seat until, January something or other.
I suspect, though, the trains were in motion, that it had to be a Mississauga seat, a Peel seat. I think things had been advanced enough. I could be totally wrong, but I bet those trains were already in motion.
They'd have run her in St. Paul's. The media would have hounded her. What? You can't run in Mississauga. You were mayor for 10 years.
Exactly. No, either way, it was double edged. I get it. Maybe John Fraser wants to give up his seat just in case. Who knows?
Yeah, but just on that point, Dave, before we move on, I mean, if John Fraser gave up his seat, and look, I'm the living proof of this. I mean, Laurie Scott, thank God, after a long period, when I say thank God for me, she said she'd give up her seat, and it's not that far away, and I was the leader of the party and so forth and so on, and I lost. the by-election, and there's no guarantee if Bonnie Crombie had John Fraser, as an example, give up an Ottawa seat, and she went down there, that people are going to say, "Oh my goodness gracious, it's Bonnie Crombie. Let's elect her." And she's a party leader. Aren't we impressed? There's no guarantee of that at all. I mean, and so in that sense, I don't think there is an easy solution for Bonnie Crombie, even if somebody did agree to give up their seat, which we've also discussed is sort of unlikely in the circumstances.
Well, but in your situation, there was as much of inter-party squabble going on, I think, that hurt your campaign as much as what was going on in the riding.
Didn't help. But having said all, it still proved the point that a party leader, in a safe conservative seat, didn't get elected when somebody was kind enough to give up their seat to try and make that happen. And so I'm just saying, but you're right, that added to it. But, that could happen here too, among those who would say, well, John Fraser shouldn't have given up his seat if he was the one that did. Or, there could be various factions, and that can lead to unexpected results, especially in a by-election.
Next up, here I want to get to the order of the speeches in a minute, but I just thought the opening here was really interesting.
Thank you so much. Oh, wow. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. My name is Marit Stiles. Look, we set out in this election to form a government on your side. Now, the results aren't everything that we hoped for, but the people of Ontario made their choice. They've re-elected the government, hoping it will help protect them from Donald Trump and his tariffs, and they've entrusted me and my team to do a different but also very important job. Folks, we've been tasked again to serve the people of Ontario as their official opposition. And our job will be
And at one point, Keith, she turned to and said, the pollsters got it wrong. And I think John Wright explained it this morning. It was probably the seat modeling, but we take your point that they didn't slide as much as possible. Boy, what I found interesting is that from the outset, we said that the important part of this campaign for Marit Stiles was to introduce herself to the electorate. And she started by saying, "I'm Marit Stiles" in her speech.
That was a very charming speech. She's very personable, and I thought she did a strong campaign as well. She was exactly what Bonnie Crombie wasn't in that speech. She was just so, "Hi, bonjour tout le monde, I'm Marit Stiles." It was just the perfect approach to this because, again, she was introducing herself to the people of Ontario. And she's going to be, even though she was the official opposition leader, people really don't often know who that is or what that is. So it's important for her to have done that the way she did and to present it as the major victory it was for the NDP. Sure, they're down 4 seats, I think. So what? They got 900,000 votes. They used them very, very efficiently to get, nearly twice the number of seats that the Liberals did. They're firmly in the opposition as official opposition status. So I think they're poised to, at least get on as far as they were. And then maybe now they can get stronger on focusing their attacks on Doug Ford, on the PC government, especially when you're now, with the Liberals having official party status, you're now going to have equal numbers of questions coming from both the NDP and the Liberals. So it's going to be a lot more. The Ford government, when the Liberals weren't an official party, the Ford government was able to ask itself a whole bunch of questions. Backbenchers would stand up with cards and read questions to ministers or to junior ministers, just chewing up question period time. That'll get eaten up now because the Liberals will have as many questions as the NDP. That'll make a big difference, and it'll help hold the government to account. So a lot's going forward here right now. But I think what we first need to see is a legislature coming back, and then see what the opposition parties, particularly Marit Stiles, what can she do here that she didn't get done last time to really, boost the NDP beyond, because they slid down to like 18% in the polls. They need to get back up higher. As I say, though, their vote was so efficient, they got nearly twice the seats as the Liberals.
Well, Tim, the striking thing for me between the two speeches, aside from content and tone between Crombie and Stiles, was just the visuals. If you're watching this on YouTube, you see Marit Stiles with a team behind her who are enthusiastic, who are energetic. The room's lit up. There was nobody behind Bonnie Crombie on the stage there. And I know it's, again, visually, it's on the radio. It doesn't make any difference, but the visuals here speak volumes in terms of how this campaign rolled out.
Great point. And symbolic too, right? If you're a leader who's about to could be stabbed in the back by her own party,
don't want anybody behind her.
maybe
that explains it.
So yeah, look, Mara Stiles she's very likable. She's got an energetic and sincere communication style, and as all you've done, she's like that in person too. Just very, very genuine. And you contrast that to the absolutely, graceless speech from Bonnie Crombie, which I think hurts her even more. Imagine you'll get to the Premier's speech, I thought, which was graceful, energizing also, and unifying. So I think the NDP just I'll disagree with Keith. I don't think they actually ran that strong of a campaign. They seem to be diffuse. And in an environment where there's so much noise, if you're across many different issues, it's hard to actually get it across to your message across the voters. They had the 407 gimmickry. They spent a few days on their own plan for tariffs, affordability, and a bit of healthcare. So I thought they were kind of all over the board, which hurt them. Bottom line, the New Democrats, I think, have to try to analyze why they just can't get over the hump. And maybe that's not possible aside from the Bob Rae circumstances. But if their colleagues have done it very successfully in Manitoba by being more of a center-left party, British Columbia NDP is certainly that way today, and at times in Saskatchewan. So if I were her, I'd figure out, because there's going to be the 10-year itch, right? The 10-year itch that cost Trudeau his job, cost Harper his job, Mulroney retired, and Chrétien was retired. It's going to hit the Doug Ford government. So how do you actually get ready to catapult and win the election campaign, just like your colleagues have done in Western Canada?
John, one of the things that I noted in her speech, she made a huge point in closing to really focus on labor, how labor came out and helped her. Now, clearly it was public service union, but, at some point she's got to get that ground back, no, if she's going to make any gain.
Yeah, and Doug Ford poses a real threat there. It's not a partisan thing, and it's not private public sector. It's drawn on those lines initially, but I think what it is that a lot of people who will call unionized working people relate to Doug Ford and his authenticity and the things he talks about. I mean, if you think of the stuff he's done, taking away the drivers, the way they call it, the car stickers, and reducing gas prices, and there's a long list. And at the end of the day, that relates to a lot of people, many of whom are unionized, working people. And so I think that Marit Stiles is right to reach out and give credit to some of the unions that helped her, but also to be very mindful over time of the fact that Doug Ford is nibbling away at her lunch, election after election. Tim rightfully mentioned Monty McNaughton and some of the people that have helped Premier Ford do that, but they've been a government that has not been against the interests, on many things. Not all things, but on many things of unionized workers. There'd be a lot of union people who disagree with that, but it's their members who vote. So
I just thought it was, interesting as well, the order of the speeches. Did that throw you off? Because the Premier came in second in terms of the order of the speeches, Keith, as opposed to sort of waiting to the end to let everybody have their say.
Well, if you remember last time, he didn't wait for anybody.
Right.
He went out first, so he didn't wait for. He didn't wait for Kathleen Wynne to step down or to concede. He went out first. I think it all stems back to when he won the leadership and they had to get out of the ballroom and he couldn't have the balloon drop. He wants to make sure he guarantees he's going to know when he wins. I don't know where to go with that. So.
Yeah, well, I just don't know that it matters as much, except for guys in this room. That's all I'm just saying.
Yeah. It's 10:30 at night, and he didn't want to miss that time frame when people went to bed. And because Dalton McGuinty did the same thing when I was in 2007. I think premiers decide, and they're the winners, so they should be gracious, and he was. Premier Ford was. And he just decided he was going to get his speech in before the 11 o'clock witching hour came along.
So there were two parts to that speech. One part, of course, he talked about, the Trump threat, but he did spend time talking about, how important it was for him, and he used the word, he's humbled by all of these things. But this was the mandate now that Ontarians have given him.
We asked the people for a mandate to cut red tape and the excuses, streamline approvals, and build things faster. The people said yes. We asked the people for a mandate to get the federal government out of our way. so we can get shovels in the ground on the projects that will build the true North Strong and Free. The people said yes. We asked the people for a mandate to build pipelines, to build rail lines and transmission lines, to diversify our trade, find new markets, new customers, and rely less on the old ones. The people said yes. We asked the people for a mandate to clean up our streets, crack down on crime, end encampments, and protect schools and daycares from drug injection sites. The people said yes. And we asked the people for a mandate to build Highway 413, the Bradford Bypass, Highway 3, Highway 7, Highway 11, Highway 69, to bring sanity back to bike lanes, to tunnel the 401, to upload Ottawa LRT, and build the future of GO Transit across Greater Toronto Area. The people said yes. This is our plan to protect Ontario. It's a plan that offers big and bold ideas. It's a vision for the future of our great province and a vision for the future of our economy.
So we finally got to the economy at the end of that bit. I didn't realize that wasn't his entire speech, but fascinating to me that the Premier could condense almost the entire platform, Tim, into 1 minute and 48 seconds. And I bet if you actually went out and asked most people, did you vote for that? He had so many things in there. He didn't necessarily have to have everybody vote for everything, but he had enough in there that he could say, yeah, I like that idea. And so that was the broad base of support. As scattered as it may have sounded, there was going to be people who glommed onto one or two of those things, and that was enough to, really broaden his base.
Well, I proudly cast my ballot for Sam Osterhoff in Niagara West to stop the bike lanes in Toronto. On my list, they drive me crazy. I think two things from this. You are going to see, I think, a very ambitious Doug Ford government. I suspect they will come back soon. I suspect that most of the key players, because it does have a strong cabinet, will remain in those positions, and you got to have the plan to fight the impact of the Trump tariff. So I think that will be an ambitious plan. Secondly, then I think it turns to legacy, right? This is 3 majorities. You obviously prepare yourself so you have the option to run for number 4. But when I think of what Doug Ford, my gut would tell me really wants to get done, number 1 is the transportation investments. The transit in the city of Toronto, the highways that he listed there. He is serious about the tunnel, whether that's done within this time frame or not, but breaking gridlock, massive investments in transportation. The second one I'm going to put on there, because it's kind of an offspring of Ford and Lecce, nuclear power. The notion that we could actually be an energy superpower exporter from the province of Ontario, uniquely positioned with clean and affordable energy. I think that it will be another lasting legacy for Doug Ford. It'll be a focus of this next 4 years.
Well, and we've said before, John Tory, the idea that all of a sudden, yes, the tariffs are going to be the immediate issue, but this litany of promises now come under higher scrutiny. 1, 2, it's also the record of the previous 7 years. He's going to have to hope that the things he rattled off there in that minute and 48 seconds are going to be the focus more so than anything in the rearview mirror, let alone the possibility of any outcome from an investigation by RCMP.
Yeah, and he knows that most of those things he listed have a degree of controversy attached to them. And so that's one of the reasons he was trying to rope them in to being part of the mandate. Because the other thing that we haven't mentioned, leaving aside extraordinary things like RCMP investigations, is, the realities of the healthcare system and its problems, and the realities of a number of other kind of things that did not get discussed really. And it's not anybody's fault. I mean, the opposition tried, but the Trump thing kind of overrode everything. Those are now all at his doorstep too, as they were before the election. So those are going to now have to be dealt with. It's one thing during the election to get Donald Trump continuously helping you by every day raising the tariff issue and keeping that as the issue. That, will still be happening for a while, but he's going to have to deal with the realities of the healthcare system and things he did not mention in sweeping them all in to the mandate that he got last night. So it's going to be very challenging times. He's up to that, but it's very challenging times. And of course, we've got a federal election to come too. And it'll be very interesting to see what his role, if any, is in all of that, and whether he is, approached for friendship by Pierre Poilievre, which hasn't been the case before now. And I'm not blaming anybody for that. I'm just saying it's the reality. It's going to be very interesting times ahead.
Keith, the part of the conversation, and the Premier has made this in a couple of stops, and it might have even been in the last day when he's really sort of addressed the need to break down the interprovincial trade barriers and so on. Premier Houston, who was here campaigning with Ford last week, has either he has done so already or introduced the legislation in Nova Scotia to do that, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They want to sell you some Moosehead. I mean, it shouldn't be that difficult to sell beer from one province to another. And I saw the president of Moosehead being interviewed, and he said that, he can't sell in Newfoundland except in the government stores. That cuts out 80% of the business is sold in private stores. In Quebec, every shipment of beer has to be, and he used air quotes, inspected. Which means they open the truck door. Oh, okay, that's a truckload of beer. And of course, there's a fee for this inspection, all these kinds of things. So I think it's important. Houston and Ford, I didn't see this coming up as an alliance, but they clearly like each other. They went to Washington together. And yeah, Houston's moving quickly on this. He was very good in communicating the fact that Nova Scotia, a province of 1 million people, sells $7.5 billion worth of stuff to the United States every year and buys back $500 million. So the trade imbalance as far as Nova Scotia is concerned is massive, and we need to keep that U.S. market. So I think to see Ford and Houston, getting serious about these interprovincial trade barriers, it's going to help. It's going to take, let's face it, there's 13 leaders here who all have a say in what products and what things they want, what regulations have to be changed or can be coordinated across the country. A lot of it can be done, but some of it will cost some provinces some money or some jobs. And so it's going to be a difficult negotiation. But Ontario is in a position, I think, to really lead on the interprovincial barriers because we're such a market for other provinces to want to market into.
Yeah, Tim, I just, not that Ford needed an invitation, but it seems as though, Houston's move makes it easier for him to really rally it up and take on a different role as Captain Canada. Yeah,
and because I suspect Quebec would be the worst sinner, but we're not without sin, right? If we can't get Moosehead, by way of example, we tend to have rules around our building code will be different from other provinces, rules around professions. Doug Ford did knock some down for healthcare workers, but Ontario probably is more protectionist than others. So I was really happy to see the Premier actually carry out his promise here and put that in his platform and then use that as leverage to open up other doors. It'll be good for Canadians, lower costs, more choice in system, more job creation. I just hope they have the guts to actually carry that through. And if Quebec doesn't play along because of Quebec politics, doing it a 9 out of 10 isn't bad either.
Yeah, well, John Tory, though, that's the whole point, though, isn't it? It doesn't. We don't have to have an all or nothing deal here. We can set the tone and set the example, and as long as that provides new markets and opportunity and jobs elsewhere, where who knows what the hell's going to happen with the Americans, then that can't be bad.
Yeah, and for years, going all the way back to when I went to the interprovincial meetings with Premier Davis in the 1980s, this has been a sort of a pledge and a goal and an objective and a commitment, and nobody's done anything, to be frank. And so I think you're right. It's not an all or nothing deal. Nobody has to give up everything, but we just have to make significant moves in the direction of being one country economically so that we can actually be stronger for that reason alone. Even if Donald Trump wasn't doing what he was doing, we should have done that years ago because it's going to create strength and jobs and prosperity for the whole country, and that's what it's all about.
We're just going to wrap it there, but just as we were talking and we came on to start the show, we were talking about the Zelenskyy-Trump meeting and how it went right off the rails, and that would be understating it. I just see the lower third on CNN. Shockingly, they have canceled the press conference with President Zelenskyy and President Trump. So, who knows what the hell's going to happen? John Tory, Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, thanks for this, and thanks for jumping in and offer up the insights over the last month and a bit. It's been fun having you here on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for doing it.
Great job.
Well, it's the least I can do, John, and you know what I like to do, the least I can do. So that we'll just keep it there. All right, that'll do it. That is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, and we are going to take a break next week, maybe 2, depending on how things play out. But as soon as we get activity and movement at the legislature, we'll jump back in, and away we go on our regular cadence, which is weekly. Right now, this wraps up the daily edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. And again, a reminder, if you've got thoughts or comments or questions about the show, you can go to my website, davetrafford.com. Hit the talkback message button on the On the Ledge page and tell us what you think, and we're happy to include it in upcoming series. And by the way, for those of you who are continuing to subscribe to the YouTube channel, thanks for doing so. And, it proved it last night. The first guy in the door for the Merit Styles party was the YouTuber. So he took full advantage. Subscribe to the channel, and we'd be happy to have you in the tent here on YouTube. Otherwise, if you're listening to it on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, etc., thanks for doing that. We understand, and we know, we can tell by the numbers, new audience there. So we're glad to have you in the tent along with us. All right. Enjoy your weekend. This is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford.
I have a YouTube channel right here, as you can all people see. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content. Look at this. Bye now.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.